I want to introduce my colleagues, Nathaniel Coram and Sarah Bainbridge, who are here with me together. It's an honor to be here with you all today. Your hospitality here from the Trust, but from all of the organizations that have shared with us over the course of the day, all the hard blood, sweat, and tears that have gotten us all to this point, and we know that we're coming to the table in the middle of something that began long ago and will continue on ahead. And if there's any way we can contribute to that in any way, shape, or form, it would be a privilege. So I just thought it would be worth beginning by introducing the practice of Mass Design Group. We are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, and we believe fundamentally in the capacity of the built environment to affect real change and healing. That it's not an object, it's not a static thing, but it is a means rather than an ends. And this captures our mission statement. It is intentionally provocative, but this idea that architecture or design is never neutral. It either heals or it hurts. Our mission is to research, build, and advocate for a built environment that amplifies and promotes justice and human dignity. In short, we partner with other mission-aligned organizations to use built environment as a way of amplifying their mission and their goals. And our design work is simply a tool by which we seek to do so. What differentiates us slightly from other firms, I think, is how much we believe in upstream engagement with organizations. We, as a nonprofit, we invest a lot of our own capital in that. We believe in it so powerfully that by the time an architect sometimes comes to the table, many large scale decisions have already been made with regard to site selection or budget. And we really do work to engage, immerse with those organizations upstream in order that we can together use the built environment to accomplish their mission. And then I think what that means to us is that we have to be extremely accountable. We have to set metrics by which we can evaluate our success collectively up front in order that we can know whether or not we have succeeded on the back end. And in order to do that, this idea of immersion is fundamental. And that's something that we hope to be able to do with you all some more tomorrow. If we do our job well, I think that there is something larger, something outside of the project that we can point to. And I think that's easier to explain by example than through these 5 tenets of practice, which we're going to do with you today by going through 3 projects that we sort of see an overlap here at the Willamette Falls. So we'll get more into this tomorrow, but this idea of defining a North Star, being accountable to how we measure our success, then determining the steps on how to get there. I think the 4 pillars that have guided you thus far, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but might be considered more of a method rather than a mission. It's a way to get somewhere. But could we think even larger about Willamette Falls as a potential place of healing or as a place of reconciliation, using our past to look towards our future, as we just heard. So the first project Sarah is going to share with you is located on the other coast in a small post-industrial city outside of New York, Poughkeepsie, New York, and I'll let her take it from here.
Hello. Sarah Bainbridge, architect and landscape architect at Mass Design Group, and just wanted again to talk a little bit about how we do this and the idea that mission is what drives projects that we're working on, and that we see our role as understanding what that mission is and amplifying it through architecture and through design or through landscape, whatever that shape that may take. And as an example, an area that we're working in Poughkeepsie, which is a post-industrial city in middle of upstate New York, and looking at one of our partners there, the Scenic Hudson nonprofit, who really see their mission as allowing people to access our natural environment, and by so doing, to create activism within them to protect those natural environments and to create the inspiration within them that they will kind of partner with this organization and with their communities to protect those natural assets over time. And how that came to be in this particular project is really looking at the Fall Kill watershed, which drains right into the city of Poughkeepsie and is also an industrial driver on a much smaller scale than here. It's only a 20 square mile watershed. It's only a 38 mile long river, but still, similar in impact, although on a different scale, in terms of what could happen if you can reactivate this space. There's a slight sizing error here, but the city of Poughkeepsie was similarly impacted in a lot of cities across the United States by urban renewal, and here in this case in a pretty negative way, both cut off from the Hudson River, its natural asset, as well as the Fall Kill, and most importantly from its main street, creating these two major bypasses in addition to this north-south corridor, these two major bypasses of the main street, which was kind of the economic and cultural hub of the city, and by creating these like 3-lane highways that just got people through it very quickly, that center of the city quickly died and has been suffering from, I'm not sure what's happening now, it's like zooming in. Let's see, how do we get past this? I don't know if I keep clicking. I think it's a slightly oversized slide, so I'm not sure if we can just page down. Interesting, this has not happened before. Maybe exit and start and maybe reactivate on the next slide so we don't have to have that. In any case, as we'll kind of move in towards that, that's the mission of this organization. So the question was, how can we amplify that through the design and maybe create new access to this riverfront, and utilize this riverfront as a new asset. And especially through revaluing it. In this particular case, it was really unseen in a similar way that we are no longer able to access the Willamette Falls without a bit of challenge. It kind of flowed through the city. It's covered over in many areas, and the opportunity here is to revalue it as a kind of infrastructural corridor that can also support these nonprofits that line it. And so how do we actually amplify the mission, and how do we create the process that allows us to hear what's important and what we should utilize as mission drivers or as project drivers or design drivers? And here it was really partnering with those local nonprofits and how they might utilize this space for their programming. And so there were 6 or 7 of them. This is the Fall Kill. Again, the perception of it, it's very hidden, and it's seen by many as a place where trash collects and floods. But there were also a lot of other stories that were uncovered over time. And the way that we tend to work is by embedding ourselves in communities. We have an office in Rwanda, as Justin mentioned. We have one in Boston, and we actually located our next office in Poughkeepsie to be really part of the community. And also getting on waders and walking through the creek and encountering people along the way, hearing their stories about how they had utilized it as kids or growing up, what were their experiences of the creek, what would they like to see there, and really also using that opportunity to uncover the potential of that place, where are the places that are unseen that could be really beautiful and activating spots for the community, and for a bit of economic and various other ways of revaluation. And also using that space, which was a kind of public gallery space, to hold these community gatherings. And this is one example of those. We had a big exhibit showing some of the stories, showing some of the history, but also utilizing that as a way to hear from the community how they wanted and what kind of visions and dreams they might have for utilizing that space. And then just to quickly walk through one example of the 5 or 6 areas that we're focusing on first along what's called the Middle Creek. This is working with the Family Partnership Center, which provides all kinds of, it's multiple nonprofits housed in a big building that were inundated by flood. And so here it's about how can these multiple nonprofits utilize this landscape and also protect the building from flooding. There's a community garden there, there's a public park there, and so infrastructurally kind of looking at both cultural, economic, and engineering solutions to this space. And then, utilizing that to both protect but also activate this community. And then in other areas, there were 5 or 6 along the way, really creating cultural venues, habitat opportunities, places for people to learn about how this particular creek and ecology contributes in their region. And the next project is Nathaniel Coram, who we've been starting to work with, who is one of the co-founders of Sustainable Native Communities, and is now part with Joseph Kunkel, who will speak about a little bit of Mass Design Group. And we worked together first time starting a couple of years ago on the Ile de Jean Charles project, which is in southern Louisiana.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with Mass. We haven't really announced this to the public yet. It's actually maybe the first public announcements of our merge. And we're Joseph and I. Joseph sending regards from him. He's meeting with Seneca, Maliseet, actually is on the Penobscot River for a minute today. It is a chance to see that undammed river at Indian Island. I'm Nathaniel Coram. I'm, as Shara mentioned, a co-founder and design director at Sustainable Native Communities. We're been a small nonprofit working mostly with tribal, almost always with rural communities, mostly in the Mountain Time Zone, but we're working in Louisiana and New York with the Mohawk and a bunch of other places. Thanks to Mass, we'll be doing some more large-scale projects, and this is one of 2 projects that we collaborated with Mass on in the sort of 2-year dance where we were figuring out how to work together effectively in Indian country. The Ile de Jean Charles, how many people have heard of the Ile de Jean Charles band in Louisiana? So this is a few folks. Crucially, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology and how we work with tribal communities. One of the things, Joseph's a Northern Cheyenne tribal member and is from Montana. I am non-native. One of the things we feel is very important is at this time for Native and non-Native folks to work together collaboratively and to derive all the healing moments and peace and reconciliation moments that are possible in that kind of collaboration, to model that and to encourage that in, from design schools to policy discussions. So we're living that, and in working with communities, we make long-term relationships with communities that have like-minded goals and similar North Stars. And this is one of those communities. One of the practices is, I talked to the traditional chief about presenting this work here, or sharing the work and the slides and the information that we're going to share, because there's been so much, there's a lot of hesitancy around sharing information, so that's an example of something we do. And these are his words about the mission in this case, what's going on at the Ile de Jean Charles to regenerate a tribe's lifeways and sites ecology for the future. And the site is, it was a massive wetland, plenty of places to live, thrive, and survive. This is a place where people escape the Trail of Tears. It's been a really wonderful place to live for many families for a really long time, and they sort of lucked out for a long time. But in the last few years, few decades, they've lost most of their land, and they're sort of, Elizabeth Colbert has a April 2nd New Yorker article about that includes this community. The New York Times called them climate refugees, which the Islanders really don't like the term. They're really some of our first internally displaced people, along with some Alaskan natives and a lot of other folks along the Gulf Coast. But they've lost most of their land, and now they're thinking about how to what to do next. We're always stepping into long-term relationships. We talk about accompaniment as a way of being with communities, where we're not really trying to work ourselves out of a job exactly. We're just trying to be responsive, go through the steps, really whatever they need. Maybe they don't need us for a certain chapter, but they may need us more in the future or less, and just to be responsive and flexible and to listen deeply and proceed as partners and help, crucially, assign goals or figure out what we're actually doing together and how we get there. So this is a timeline, and I guess crucially it points forward and backwards, from the Trail of Tears to a place where this relocation will have happened. And this is the traditional Chief Albert, their state recognition, which happened along the way. One of the tools that we've deployed, which is a memorandum of understanding, like how we're going to work together, sort of signing something together that describes how we'll do it. Also, a declaration of purpose with documents that other tribes and other communities can use to establish a relationship to go forward together towards built environment goals. This was the project team. It's very important for us to sort of stay neutral and flexible. So one of the ways to do that is to bring be development partner or bring grants to the table. In this case, it's a National Academy of Sciences grant that allowed us to partner with Mass and a bunch of other folks you see here. Crucially, with the tribe to stay with it, to be there, to do the immersion, sort of deep learning that's required to convince them, if they didn't know already, that they're the experts about their own community, and we have a certain amount of technical assistance to bring it together. Hopefully we can get somewhere that's more elevated than what we could do as sort of traditional architects and community members at the grassroots level. Bringing also, it's been more and more about storytelling and narrative and like helping frontline communities in some cases tell their stories in places like Ile de Jean Charles. This is Chantel's sort of their I don't know, she connects with everybody. She's sort of the pole that everything revolves around. And so some of her words, building is not a part of the landscape itself, the heart of the larger body that extends beyond the site. So part of this work is really about architecture, but it's also, I think, one of the things that's so wonderful about Mass is that it's so much more than it's not just the building. In this case, it was a toolkit and sort of a set of protocols to allow for traditional lifeways to flourish. We actually are just now, a site has sort of happened, but for a long time, we've been working on a brief and a mode of operating together where there wasn't even a clarity on site control. But a toolkit and probably architecture coming, and now a site is clearly in view. Happens to be 4 key pillars here too. This is what the community came up with. Memorialization, lost heritage. They talk about the long goodbye. There's so much history there. Regeneration of a lifeway and ecology. Set of lifeways were one of the architecture components is to talk about a seed kiva or a library, a way of getting ethnobotanical, useful medicinal plants, and how to bring those from the island and from other sites to the relocation site, along with the knowledge and practices that. Lifeway continuation, cultural protocols, which will lead to community spaces, commons, educational spaces. We did a lot of time in community, a lot of exercises, a lot of showing folks precedents, including some case study movies that we developed. We tried to get consensus around ideas. This is Joseph Kunkel in the lab, seated next to the traditional sub-chief Boyo there in that 2015 meeting. Just the idea that we'll be there. It wasn't at all clear what was going on. They chose resettlement when all these other coastal communities did not. So and this is normally wouldn't really be very interested in relocating folks, but these again, accompaniment, and through this NES grant, we're able to connect with many community members, go out to house, share meals, do deep listening, and even connect around activities and site visits. I guess this is a picture I took. We're walking what is now the relocation site. It wasn't clear at the time of the site survey, but the point is that this site has the ability to hold, for example, some of the plant materials, and there is indeed some naturalized site area where there's some interesting things happening already, like the palmetto, for example, which is a deeply important plant in several ways. That's one example there. What to reseed, how to bring things from site to site. These are some of the crucial pillars of this project. The peace and quiet they found on the island, the attentiveness to folks through the process, the four directions, the cardinal directions, that special and sacred meanings, and the connection to water that is, and how to bring that to a more inland site, which luckily has some canals on little bayou, so that's a possibility. One of the, we're just getting into conceptual design, but one of the tracks that really resonates is this, the Pier Road, where this traditional boat, we went to the traditional boat building museum and started drawing forms and ideas about materiality and process and how materials and craft skills and cultural lifeways can come together and be more than a building. From teaching different ways to cast nets from different kinds of docks, for example, is one really interesting set of ideas. And then there's also a lot of work with small metals and sort of world-class welding facilities and shipbuilding talents that are all assets there. There's some palmetto weave there in the lower left, so starting to bring materiality into that discussion. And I guess they're talking about the long goodbye. We're there for the long haul, and that's how we work. I mean, I think as at Jean Charles, so here at Willamette, where this is Indian country, this is native habitat, this is industrial ecology, and it's a landscape full of opportunities for healing. And we're really all thrilled that you've invited us in to dream this with you. And I guess when you get through this process, great results can happen, and Justin has one of those to share.
Okay. So those represent two very long-term projects that are on a timescale, each of their own. Post-industrial creek, relocation of a tribe. This is a project that happened very, very rapidly, but it followed the same methodology. And I thought it would be worth concluding here if we have the time still to move through this. We're doing okay on time? Okay. I share the mission of our partner organization, the Equal Justice Initiative, because it is their vision, ultimately, that we were agents of in this process. Their mission is to end mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, to challenge racial and economic injustice, and to protect basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in American society. So the relevance of lynching, the history of lynching in America to that story is a missing piece of American history that Brian sought to unearth, to unbury, to re-expose. And when we first encountered this project, it was in the New York Times in 2015, when Brian and his team released a research report identifying over 4,000 individuals who had been lynched, murdered at the complicity of the US government between 1850 and 1940. And the spatial condition that this represented, the memorialization of this, to mark each of those 4,000 sites, was Brian's ambition. And we set out to accomplish that with him. At the time, there was no land, there was no money to do so, but we could begin the process of healing, of truth-telling, by designing an engagement process with the end user at the outset, which took the form of a soil collection, as it's now called. Just looking at the state of Alabama, where EJI is headquartered in Montgomery, there are 364 victims of lynching in the report. And EJI organized community engagement sessions whereby people would come to the headquarters in Montgomery. They would go through legal briefs for each of those documented victims, and folks would drive out to those sites and at those sites fill jars with the name of each individual, the location and the date of their murder, and bring it back to EJI's headquarters. And so in a sense, with simply the sort of modest means of a glass jar, we were able to begin realizing the mission and the vision of the Equal Justice Initiative. And I think it is this soil collection that set in motion, that built the consensus, that we can speak of it in terms of funding, but I think more in terms of scale of national will to see a project like this through. That it really became possible to think of continuing this process of healing with a more permanent structure, which you'll see is also something that is dynamic and impermanent and changing over time, just like the soil collection itself. And it was that essence of the soil that guided our design through the project. In Brian's words, soil has embedded in it memory, but also the possibility for the future. And it was soil that inspired the site design for the project, which looks at lynching as a moment on a much larger historic spectrum, beginning with slavery and ending in mass incarceration, which Brian argues is an evolution, that slavery never ended, it evolved. And the history of lynching is one part of that evolution. And so the site itself is organized into 4 quadrants that recall the history of slavery, lynching, the Great Migration, and finally the era of mass incarceration. The memorial design itself took very seriously the capacity for space to provide an invitation for transformation, for learning. That's not something that can be imposed, that's something that needs to be chosen. And so we thought about how Brian identified these 5 stages of transformation, which we sought to create in the narrative experience of the memorial. That each marker, which roughly is at the scale of an individual, maintains its position as the visitor reorients to it throughout space. The first stage, one is confronted with markers at grade. The second is a moment of realization that what was once perceived as supporting was actually levitating. And that discomfort evolves as one moves through to create a gathering space. The markers become more dense overhead. This is at the deepest point in the memorial, a impromptu place to sit, reflect, for gathering, and to be. This notion of proximity is something fundamental to Brian's practice and inspired us so deeply is that there's no way you can change your mind about something if you're not near it for enough time. And I heard time and time again today how this idea of proximity, just being able to be on that platform, the sort of transformation that takes place from viewing this thing from afar, from the downtown street corner, from the end of Main Street, versus being able to stand on that platform at this crossroads of time. But I think what's most significant about this project is that it does look to the future. It's not just remembering. It has a very specific and active role in the ambition to facilitate truth-telling and reconciliation around this history. So each marker in the memorial is duplicated in the landscape in a sort of state of purgatory in anticipation of being claimed by the political jurisdiction, the county that was complicit in the original crime, so that each of these markers will be removed and erected in those sites around the country, as was shown in the original report, as a statement of commitment to never let anything like this happen again. And so in a sense, the memorial is designed from this end condition backwards and is still in the process of being built. So over time, that memory bank might become a place of gathering and a view of the marker in public square. And so as we approach this project with you all, we come to it, we zoomed in on the 4 pillars and are moved by them all. I think that we inherently see something behind all of those that is singular, and that will be that piece that might unlock 10x the private funding that is larger than Oregon City and Willamette Falls. And we look forward to exploring what that might be with you as that relates to the complex history that this site represents, the way that it relates to our current sort of political atmosphere, and how this might be a signpost or a North Star that we could find common ground on.